I'm Edwin Warfield, the publisher of City Biz, and I'm honored today to interview Andrew Sun, who's the president at the District Wharf Properties. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Edwin. I appreciate the time.
The District Wharf has reestablished DC as a waterfront destination. Can you tell us about its origins and its present mix of office, retail, entertainment, hotels, marine, and some of the sort of key features?
Sure. Yeah. So for folks who don't know, the Wharf is a 3.5 million square foot, multi-billion-dollar mixed-use development on the banks of the Potomac River on the Washington Channel. If you're driving in from Virginia, you can't miss it. It's pretty much the entire waterfront. The project itself is comprised of a lot of the big uses. We've got about 1 million feet of office. We have 904 apartments for rent, in addition to a couple of hundred condos that we sold during the development part of the process. We have 4 hotels on site, 4 different brands and chain scales. We've got 300,000 feet of retail, inline retail. We have a 6,000 person concert hall, a 2,000 space garage, and 400 marina slips. So we've got just about everything shy of industrial and data center.
And so, how has the wharf reshaped the real estate landscape in DC?
Yeah, and it's probably best to go back in time. And Edwin, sorry if I'm going to hinder or ask a question you're going to answer a question you're going to ask. But the history of the wharf really goes back to the 1940s and the time of urban renewal in the U.S. Urban renewal in DC basically meant the creation of the Southwest Freeway, which effectively split off the Southwest from the rest of DC. It displaced thousands of businesses and tens of thousands of residents. What's more is that it removed Main Avenue, got rid of a waterfront promenade, and basically left it abandoned for going on 70 years. Fast forward to 2006, Monty Hoffman, really the visionary behind the project, and at the time Stuber Brothers, won the rights to redevelop the project through the Anacostia Waterfront Commission. And so that sort of kicked off a multi-decade effort to be able to redevelop and where we are today. Some major highlights along the way. So in 2006, the project was awarded. In 2008, we secured the $198 million TIF pilot public financing program, the largest in DC history at the time, could still be. Securing this project as a true public-private partnership, which I think is really cool. In 2010, Madison Marquette, my former company, entered the fray and partnered with Hoffman Associates to form Hoffman Madison Waterfront, HMW, who served as developers of the project. So that's 2010. Fast forward to 2014. In the interim years, there was a lot of entitlement work that happened. And in 2014, our limited partner, PSP Investments, was brought into the project, and we broke ground on phase 1. In 2017, so 3 years of development, pretty much all of phase 1, 2 million square feet, delivered on the same day on October 12th, 2017, which is a feat that frankly, I don't know if it could be replicated. It's something pretty incredible. This is not the largest project I've worked on, but certainly no project and no developer has ever had the ability or the will to be able to deliver everything at the same time. And frankly, it was important for us. As I mentioned, the history of the Southwest Waterfront basically was not a location that the public went to for those interim 70 years. And so to open everything at once, I think was a big reason why we found success. We capped it off with a Foo Fighters concert, and so that was in 2017. 2 years later in 2019, that's actually when I entered the fray as the head of asset management for Madison Marquette. We refied out of our construction loans from phase 1 into an $800 million property loan, which is the largest in DC history at the time. Senior term loan led by Wells Fargo and a mezzanine loan led by Blackstone, which is all great. Obviously, it took a lot of time and effort. But in October of 2019, the same year, we executed an $847 million construction loan led by Goldman Sachs, which replaced phase 1 as the largest loan in DC history. And so in 2019, we're off to the races, building phase 2. The phase 2 completed in October of 2022. And really since then, we've been marching towards stabilization. So long history, but sort of the important things are that, public-private partnership, great involvement from the city, and some like excellent equity partners and expertise through Hoffman and Madison.
Well, you have stolen a few of my questions, so I'll move forward a little bit. Can you drill into a little bit? You talk a little bit about the role that the government played, the public-private partnership. Walk us through that part of the storyline.
Sure. So, it is important to note that the Wharf sits on multiple ground leases, and so this is truly public-private partnership. So, 99-year ground lease, all prepaid, dollar a year, so all prepaid at closing. And so that there's certainly that element. I've already mentioned the financing element, which is a big part of the sources and uses in the deal. But also, it's an ongoing relationship we have with the city. We sort of uniquely control all of the Wharf, and sort of through our relationship with the city, have the ability to control the public areas in a way that you wouldn't see in other areas because of our unified ownership. We can host 75,000 person events, shut off roads. We've worked the city to increase cafe areas, and so there's a lot of collaboration. I think the important thing about this project is not just about developers out there making make money. There's a real commitment from the owners, the board that I report to, my organization, to be able to to serve as sort of the beacon in DC. Obviously, we're hearing now about crime and some of like the issues with office in the city, and honestly, we've kind of been like the bastion of the city that has sort of continued to drive the economic engine, and some of the earlier relationships with the city were primarily surrounding building the thing and making sure that we had commitments to do events, including the 100 events that we do a year, most of them free. But it sort of evolved into how can we continue to support each other with council or local agency commissioners to continue to have this be the it neighborhood in DC, which is pretty wild because you look back 10 years ago and I think most people would have had a hard time identifying where the wharf was.
So you mentioned that the Wharf was launched in October 2017. Can you share some of the milestones and your role in those milestones since the launch in 2017?
Yeah. So the Wharf opened in 2017. I joined in 2019, and right out of the gate, again, everything opened at once, which is pretty wild and a bold maneuver. But in that time, we've experienced sort of a shift in sort of retail consumption and how retail/restaurants, like what is sort of the driver of mixed use. And so some of the fast or some of the soft goods retailers we had at the get-go had to be transformed, and we've benefited really since 2017, sort of the explosion of food and beverage and entertainment as a use. And other big milestones include having our 4 hotels now, but at the time 3 hotels in 2017, sort of establish themselves as hospitality destinations in the city. As a reminder, with the exception of the Channel Inn, which is a hotel, I guess if you're being generous with it, with the exception of that sort of mom and pop establishment, this was not a hotel destination. And so it took really until early 2020 for us to sort of establish ourselves as that destination. It was not a foregone conclusion. What's more, hitting stabilization on our phase 1 office portfolio, some 500,000 feet, big milestone for us. In that, again, there was no real office here. Indeed, some of the early deals that we had to do, look very similar to buying deals. Thankfully, looking here today, we don't really have to do that anymore. This is the premier trophy office location in the city. But I could really march down each of the uses and talk about different points at which I would have classified it as stabilization. I joined in 2019, in April of 2019. So I guess a year and a half after the project had opened, and it's easy to look back now and say it was going to be a smash hit, but I think there's a lot of concerns about whether we could have hit our marks. As a reminder, we were in the market in early 2019 on $800 million financing, and that's easier said than done, and required a lot of effort from the team to be able to hit our marks and size the loan appropriately. So, yeah.
So it was interesting to listen to some of your interviews related to how you survived COVID, because you had this interaction of office and retail and entertainment. Can you just give us an overview of how you navigated those challenging times?
Yeah, it was. That was a great question. Appreciate you asking it. 2020. Everything sort of like fell apart in March 13, 2020, and sort of like if you step back, like basically all of the uses were affected very differently at different times. By way of example, on March 13, 2020, I got a call from each of the GMs saying, "Hey, listen, like our reservations are empty. There's literally zero people who are checking into the hotels. All the reservations are canceled." And so right out of the gate, we had to make some very difficult decisions about whether we wanted to keep the hotels open or close them, and what we had to do related to staffing. Unique to the hotels, obviously, that they tend to be very labor intensive, and so right out of the gate, we had to reduce the scope of what the hotels offered. We unfortunately lay off a great number of people, which we did over time. We furloughed and ultimately had to lay off folks. So in the hotel front, that was really immediate. Retail was sort of the next use to really get affected. People stopped going into our restaurants and establishments. And I think we took a very different approach, and I appreciate sort of the partnership with our board and a partnership with the lenders to work out a global retail rent relief program that kept most of our tenants in place. And I would venture to say that most other developments of this magnitude weren't able to achieve that. And my approach was, how about we stop demanding that they pay rent, wait a couple of months to see how COVID is going to shake out, and then size the rent relief deals according to where the situation was. Effectively, what we ended up doing was something, again, very, very unique, but we didn't ask anybody to pay rent. If they paid rent, great. We let the AR grow, I guess, and then we agreed to all the amount that was owed. We agreed to take half of that. We'll write it off. The other half, we're asking you to pay back to us over 5 years. And it worked. It's a bold maneuver, and at the time, I was talking to some of my older colleagues and folks who are in the industry, and taking the approach of continue to ask for rent and then having to cut rent relief deal after rent relief deal after rent relief deal. It's just not practical for us. We were a relatively lean organization, and so we benefit. I think we really benefit from that. So much so that once you sort of fast forward from 2020 to where we are today, we've been able to expand rents pretty significantly. If you look at our phase 1 rents versus our phase 2 rents, increased rents on Main Avenue versus the water side. Obviously, people want to be on the water, but we've been able to drive rents on the water. And where we entered COVID on phase 1 with 90% occupancy, I ended COVID 99% occupied with only one space remaining. And so I think a little bit of generosity and sort of understanding went a long way. I'm sorry, I went a long time about retail because that's where a lot of our efforts were. Residential was very different in that in June of 2020. We lost about 10% occupancy right at the gate. Everyone just left once all the shutdowns were sort of lifted, and it took us many years to get back to what we would constitute stabilization. And I'd venture to say that some of our AR challenges, which are being litigated in the various courts and being addressed by DC Council, we're still dealing with some impacts of it. But that sort of happened a little later. And then we get to office where very uniquely, they continue to pay rent the entire time. But, there's been a lot of sort of knock-on effects of COVID, including work from home, that we're addressing now. But thankfully, leasing is great, rents are great, things are great.
So outside of the Wharf, what are your thoughts on where's the office market headed in DC, and what's its impact on retail and hospitality? Is conversion a reality of office to residential? Yeah, just give me your thoughts on the general DC market.
Yeah, and for context for the for the listeners, vacancy in DC is something like over 20%, with the vast majority of that happening in sort of the B and C, supply. Trophy actually is doing pretty well, and you see some pretty great stories about trophy deals happening in the market. I won't bore you with them. We've got a few ourselves. So first things first, I suspect that what the universe of investors and lenders and appraisers are going to think about is differentiating the trophy and A stuff from the B and C stuff, right? And so when you sort of look at those vacancies, though not great, tend to be more in line with historical norms. what does that mean for the B and C stuff? You got a lot of problems. The footprints that don't make sense. These mega blocks, especially down in the more traditional commercial corridors of DEC, just like don't really lend themselves to being apartment, no matter how much you want it to happen. Like residents need windows, and windows are tough to get when you have a building that spans an entire city block. And so, will it work? I think that for it to work, it will require significant investment from the city. A couple of years ago, the mayor released a program, like a tax relief program, real estate tax relief program, which is like $3 million, which is maybe fine for one development, but certainly not for the universe. So I think that many of these buildings probably just need to be raised, and then re-envisioned in its entirety. But it will take time for us to get there. Obviously, a lot of what's downtown is controlled by the GSA as well, and so I think this new administration and how they treat the return to work policy will dictate a lot of it. But I suspect that we're many years away. I think that what we're going to see before we solve the problem of oversupply of the B and C product is probably that the universe of investors and sort of industry types start looking at office differently, a la what the retail market saw in the back half of the 2010s. When everybody sort of incorrectly assumed that all retail was the same, but really the dogs were these regional malls that sort of had no business, be in existence anymore, and sort of the neighborhood grocery anchor power centers that like have demonstrated some rural resilience. And so I think that evolution that took place in the back half of the 2010s in the retail space, including my former company, Federal Realty, will have to happen in the office. And I suspect that if not next year, 2026, we'll start seeing more of that sort of repositioning of and the rethinking of how of the office portfolio in DC.
Great. In 2023, you were promoted to president of the Wharf. So, what are your new responsibilities?
Sure, and yeah, that was about a year and a half ago, and I might use this opportunity to plug sort of District 4 Properties as a company itself. We are, 32 full-time staffers strong, 40 when we scale for seasonal employees, and we are an independent company of, Hoffman, Madison, and Waterfront. We are the investment manager and operator of the Wharf, and so we've got, we do everything from overseeing the leasing to the capital markets to the operations and the events that happen on site. And we were formed by the partners, as a fully owned subsidiary of the joint venture. So, I report to a board that consists of Hoffman executives, Madison Marquette executives, and PSP executives, with the goal of making the Wharf, viable as an investment, obviously, but also, continuing to uphold our obligations to the city and the neighborhood for being sort of the destination in DC.
So, yeah, your career included stints at Federal Realty Trust, RLJ Lodging Trust, and JBG Smith. Can you share some highlights of your career and the decision to join the Wharf?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I started my career at JLL, then we refer to it Jones Lang LaSalle, in the public institutions group. Now, this is where I'm going to like age myself, probably younger than most people expect for somebody in my role. But I graduated college in 2009 at a time when there wasn't that much real estate going on. I very uniquely had an opportunity to join the public institutions group, who did real estate work for federal, state, local governments, and I worked on the Army privatization team, helping oversee the Army's public-private partnerships, where they would bring in private sector developers to revitalize and operate these 3,000 home communities on Army bases. So real estate, niche real estate, and yet we were doing $300 million debt deals at the time. We were building pro formas. We were doing site visits. All things that when 2011 rolled around, I found myself very uniquely as like a very viable analyst candidate. Everyone was sort of vying for analyst candidates who had experience reviewing loan docs, building pro formas, and Federal Realty, at the time was launching its Pike and Rose project, and I was very lucky to be selected to be the third member of that team. And for the first 6 months there, I sat there and I built all the pro formas for for Pike and Rose, phase one and the future phases. We got the first phase approved through the investment committee and the board, and that sort of like kickstarted Pike and Rose as folks who are in the DC area would probably appreciate it. And so that's probably the most impactful project in my career in that like I got a lot of learning in a very short period of time. At Federal Realty, I sort of elevated working for Jim Taylor, who was then the CFO of Federal Realty. He's now the CEO of Brixmor, and sort of like with him as a mentor, got to work on all of Federal Realty's mixed-use projects. So now we bring in Assembly Row in Somerville, Massachusetts, phases 1 and 2. I got to work on some of the Santana Row later phases redevelopment, and got to touch a bunch of different acquisitions that were coming through the pipeline with mixed-use components. Sprinkled in there some asset management work, sprinkled in there corporate finance work, and so after 4 years there, a lot of work in a short period of time. It was clear that to move on. RLJ I was thinking about maybe going to business school, but RLJ Lodging Trust came calling, and it offered a real unique opportunity to work in the hotel space. At that point, I'd only done one hotel deal. So work in hotels, get corporate finance experience, get real hardcore finance experience. Work on transactions both on the debt and portfolio acquisition disposition side, and then really most meaningful to me was working on the $7 billion M&A with the merger between Felcor Lodging Trust and RLJ Lodging Trust. It was the best way to gain all the M&A skills without ever having to work in an investment bank. So did 2 years there, and then at that time it was very clear that I needed to get back to the real estate. Lest I lose sort of that connection to mixed-use development. And our JBG at the time, JBG Companies, was looking to hire some asset managers on the eve of their sort of like public launch, the merger with Vornado's DC portfolio, and their launch into JBG Smith. And so joined JBG Companies, became a JBG Smith employee, and then got to work on 33 projects under my portfolio as a VP of retail asset management, including all the retail in Pentagon City and Crystal City, now National Landing. And so, before we had even coined it National Landing, I got to work on sort of the early plans and helping to identify whether we would if we won Amazon, what the world would look like versus if we didn't win Amazon, what the world would look like. I'm not in any headline about the HQ2 bid at all, but I did have an opportunity to like help pave the way through, dozens of negotiations to pave the way for development. So not sexy stuff, and yet, something that's very important for development. And there was one project that was going to take me away from National Landing. It was the Wharf. In 2019, there really was no project that sort of had the scale and sort of I don't know if gravitas is the right word, but like certainly the impact on the city. And, I had an opportunity through Madison Marquette to head up asset management, and the rest is history. 6 years later, I'm still here, and have had the benefit and the privilege of being able to like lead this organization.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. So what is next for the Wharf? Well, is any big plans that are teed up?
Yeah, while you don't see it from the outside, we still have some office that needs to get built out, and so there's actually a lot of construction work happening on site, albeit in the buildings. So we're going to get that done. We've got to stabilize phase 2 because it only delivered a couple of years ago. Natural sort of stabilization efforts. We've got $1.3 billion of debt that's coming due here pretty soon. So a large part of the focus of this organization in my time will be on supplanting whoever the last deal is the biggest debt deal in DC history. Taking a step back though, from a public perspective, we have established ourselves as the local and regional destination in DC. So other people may disagree with me, but the 8 million people who visit every year will probably agree that we've accomplished that. My goal next year and beyond is to establish the Wharf as an international destination. So, there's a lot of things you have to do in order to accomplish that, and success sort of plays out in a lot of different ways, including in our 4 hotels, like stealing legacy business that from other parts of DC, and so I want to take the embassy business, and I want to demonstrate this as sort of the international destination. all in an effort to continue to run a very vibrant vibrant mixed use community that you know again has 8 million visitors a year, and I don't see any reason why we can't hit 10 million in the next couple of years.
So, Andrew, is there any part of this interview, are there any questions that I should have asked that you would have liked me to ask? Is there any part of your personal story or the district story that you'd want to share that you haven't shared with us yet?
Perhaps on my personal, story history, it's like I didn't realize that real estate was actually an industry that folks went into. I graduated from Dartmouth College in 2009, and yeah, I actually had joined the Army at the time, and would have gone to basic training in officer candidate school had it not been for a head injury. And my sort of, my getting a job at JLL was a pure happenstance. What I try to think about for folks who are listening to this, who are looking to break into the industry, is that this is a great industry, and it continues to evolve. And that, in my experience, folks who come from very different backgrounds, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be, sort of race or gender, but socioeconomic background. Like I try to build a team that has diversity, across age and gender, and I find that in a mixed use environment, when you're in charge of projects like this, that that having different points of view, and again, it could look very different, is very beneficial. And so for those who are looking to break into the industry, it's a great industry, and stick with it. There's a lot more ways to get in now than there was 20 years ago.
Well, Andrew, I particularly enjoyed this interview because in my senior year of high school, I did an internship with the Rouse Company in Columbia. You probably weren't even born, way back in the early days of Columbia. And then going into the 80s, I had a magazine called Warfield's Magazine, and I had Bill Struver on the cover of it. So I was interested in this interview, and it's exciting to hear what you've been involved in. And my son went to the University of Maryland, so the next time we're in DC, we're going to come take a look at your operation. So again, thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me on.